Hi, let's take a look at an application of data tables to individual income tax. I went out to Google and did a search on 1040 instructions, and it took me to this IRS website that shows a PDF file with 108 pages of instructions on how to file your federal income taxes. It doesn't include forms and schedules and all the associated instructions with them. I think you could get closer to 40,000 pages that way. We're going to focus on these 108 pages today. In fact, we're going to focus on the very bottom line. We're going to go down to the end and scroll up a few pages to this tax rate schedules page. You can't see it at this zoom level, but we've got 4 different filing statuses, or 4 different tables for 5 different filing statuses. If you're a single person, you use these numbers. If you are married and want to file as married filing jointly, or if you qualify as a widow or widower, you can use these tables and pay less taxes than you would if you filed as single. If you're married filing separately, you'll pay a slightly higher rate than if you were married filing jointly, but there are some advantages in some rare situations. And then there's also a head of household filing status. Let me zoom in a little bit to this top table and to this warning up at the top. I'll go through these numbers in a moment, but the warning says, basically, this is for your information. Don't use it to figure your tax. Instead, follow the instructions in the previous 108 pages. So what it really says is if your taxable income, and I'll get to that in a moment, is greater than $39,475, but not over $84,000, then you're going to pay $4,500 in taxes plus 22% of the amount over that $39,475. So some people might say, well, I'm in the 22% tax bracket if I have $50,000 of taxable income. Other people might say I'm in the $39,475 tax bracket. Probably a whole lot more people would say the former. What I'm going to do is put this table in Excel, and then we'll do some calculations on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is hold down the Windows key and the Shift key and the letter S. It's going to allow me to take a snapshot of this and copy it to the clipboard. It even told me that it copied it to the clipboard. Then I'm going to go to a blank Excel sheet and paste it. And so what I want to do is rebuild this table as values like so. And so in my example, if my taxable income is greater than, or if it equals 50, then that means it is at least $39,475, but less than $84,200. Then my tax is going to be the $45,443 plus 22% of the amount over this. So my tax is going to be this plus this times my taxable income minus this. Now there are a few problems with this. Hopefully you people who throw things at your screen notice that I broke modeling rule number 1. I used a value where a reference would work. So I'm going to move this out of the way. We'll build out a little model and we'll see if it matches the 68, 58, 50. Let's say that I have gross wages. I want this to work out to 50,000, so I'm going to say 62,200 because the standard deduction that every single taxpayer, if my filing status is single, the standard deduction is 12,200. And what that means is my taxable income is this minus this. Highlight those, do an Alt-HOI. And that means if I made 62 grand at the job and the government let me deduct 12.2, then my taxable income is 50,000. Now, if I had given $15,000 to charity, I wouldn't want to use the standard deduction. I would want to itemize my deductions and take off the full 15, and then my taxable income would be lower and the taxes that we calculate would be lower. But let's go with this for now. The first thing I need to do is figure out which row of this table I'm going to be on. And since we are doing this one online in a video, I'm just going to go ahead and give you the answer. I need to find the applicable table row, And what I mean by that is if I made at least 0 but less than 9,700, then the applicable row would be 1. If I made at least 9,700 and less than 39,475, the applicable row would be 2, and so on. And so the way I'm going to find that is I'm going to use a match keyword, function rather. And if I'll hit Shift F3, then what match says is if you'll give me a lookup array like this, a lookup value like this, and have me look it up in an array, and you don't even have to give me a match type, then I will tell you what row you're on. So if I look up 50,000, it's already telling me the answer is going to be 3. When I hit OK, I see I need the third row of the table. Well, where that gets super important is if I want to see what my marginal tax rate is. Marginal tax rate. I can use an index function and say, look in this array for the third item in that array. And it says you're in the 22%. I'm going to do an Alt-HP to turn that to a percent. Had I made a $200,000 wage, I'd be in the 32% tax bracket. If I'd have made $2 million, I would be in the 37% tax bracket. And we did that by using a match formula and an index. Match function and an index function. So let me go back to 62.2. And we know we're in the marginal tax rate of 22%. We need to figure out what is coming in column C. Cumulative tax from previous brackets. Alt-HOI. And here, I'm going to use the same index type thing. So in fact, I'm going to come in here and click on that, hit an F4, because I'm always going to want to refer to the table row, but this index is going to change. So when I copy that down, hit F2, I can move this. Notice how it copied it down because I didn't have any absolute references. I didn't care because I was going to move it over anyway, but I need to move it back up one. And it should look up my value of the third item on the list. I hope this will give me 4543, but it does it as a percent. So I'll do an Alt-HN for number and down arrow to get to currency. So I got the 4543 that way, and that is C. Let's remind ourselves. Now watch, it's going to try to make that a copyright symbol. When I hit the space key, I'll hit the Control Z to undo it, delete that space, and hit return, Alt-HOI, and we're good. So marginal tax rate was actually column D. I might want to know that for future reference. And then I also want to get the bottom of the marginal, or the bottom of the bracket. And by that I mean column E. When I hit space, it gives me some weird character, so I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that, and backspace. And then I'll hit Tab to move over to the next column. So let me show you what that formula looked like, and I'm going to copy both of those down. And I'm going to fix this one to now look over here. Get column E. So if that's the bottom of the bracket, then the tax in the marginal bracket, and I can think of that as column D times taxable income minus column E. I'm going to hit undo to get rid of that character. And I'm just going to call that F in case I refer to it again. And so that tax is going to be this number times this minus this. There's what that formula looks like if you need to see it. And so then my federal income tax total is going to be C undo plus F. So it's going to be this plus this. And look at that, 68, 58, 50, which is what we were hoping we would get. But what's great about this is I can come in here and put any gross wages in there. Go back to the 2 million. Now, why we haven't come to this in this course yet. Why did those turn to hashtags or pound signs, we used to say before the internet? It's because the number is too wide to fit in that column. So I want to highlight these values that I care about and do an Alt-HOI or Alt-HOI, you'll hear me say, and widen those so that we can see all the numbers. Now I've got a little bit of different formatting going on here, so I'm going to copy that, Alt-HVST, and that would be my total federal income tax on gross wages of $2 million. But let me get back to the 62,200. I'm going to delete this guy to get it out of the way. And let's build a data table that shows gross wages and shows our federal income tax. But I'd also like to know what bracket I'm in, and is there anything else I'd like to know? What table row I used. That'd be interesting to know. So all of those things are kind of outputs. If this is my input, Alt-HJ, input, I said that was an output. I'm going to hold down the control key and click on a couple of other things that I said were outputs and select them all at the same time and do an Alt-HJ and come down to output. Okay, so my gross wages I would like to look at from 20, and let's count by 20s. Here's a good spot for the mouse. And then to get the federal income tax, I'll just refer to that output. To get the bracket, I'll refer to that output. And to get the table row, I'll refer to that output. Since those are all outputs, Alt-HJ, output, Alt-HJ, input. Okay, select all the cells and only enough cells to be able to get the colored ones and say Alt-A-W-T. So do I have a row input on this table? Hit pause and think about that for a minute. No, of course not. Do I have a column input on this table? Yes, of course. And the column input is gross wages. So we'll click there, say OK. And we can see, I'm going to copy this format to Alt-HVST. And here, instead of copying a format, I'm just going to do Alt-HP for %. And then the table rows don't need to be. So if I'm making $20,000 a year, I use table row 1 to calculate $780 in taxes, and I know that I'm in the 10% tax bracket. But if I get up to $280,000 a year, I had to go all the way down to table row 6, which put me in the 35% tax bracket and federal income tax of $68,924. I'd like to add two more things to this while we're talking about taxes. Medicare tax is 1.45% of gross wages, so that times that, and Social Security, also known as Old Age and Survivors Disability Insurance, I think, off the top of my head, that is 6.2%. So this times gross wages. Now we pay 1.45% of every dollar that we earn to Medicare. However, for Social Security, once we get to, I think it's $137,007, that's called a wage limit, then we don't have to pay any more Social Security. So it's actually a regressive tax, we'll see in a moment. So while this is 1.45% of wages, whatever they are, this is 6.2% times 137.7 or B3. Now I need to put a min or a max right here. So I know it starts with M, so I'll type in M. Do I want the minimum of $137,000 or whatever my wages actually were, or the maximum of $137,000, what my wages already actually were? The Social Security tax maxes out at $137,000. So most students are going to type max there. But really, you want the minimum. Because if you only made 62, you want to use the smaller of these numbers to multiply by 6.2% to calculate your Social Security tax. You don't want to use the max. So let's use min and see if I got it right or if I remembered that wrong. And let's come over here and add those outputs. So Alt-HJ outputs and we call this Medicare and OASDI equals that equals that. Format them as outputs. And let's rebuild this data table. Alt AWT. Do I have a row input cell? No, we didn't change the structure of the data table. Do I have a column input cell? Yeah, I have a column of things I'd like that function machine to reach over and put into this input cell repeatedly so I can collect all these outputs. And when I do, well, I guess I need to tell it what that would be, don't I? When I do, now I get a Medicare tax in addition to all this other information I was getting. I'm going to copy Alt HVST. I get a Medicare tax that just goes up and up and up and up with the more money I make. But I get a Social Security tax that goes up and up and up and then levels out at $137,000. So this is a regressive tax. Now I could calculate the percentage of my wages to get an effective tax rate, but I'm going to do that over here outside of the data table. So I'm going to have a effective tax rate for federal income tax, Medicare, and Social Security, old age and survivors disability insurance. And so if I took the federal income tax divided by my gross wages, Alt HP, that's about a 4%, Alt H0, that's 3.9 exactly. And I want to be able to copy that down and across. So where do I want the dollar signs to go? I always want to refer to column F. So I'm going to type a dollar sign in there. But when I copy it down, I want that 5 to change to a 6 and to a 7 and to an 8. When I copy this over, I'm going to be in trouble anyway, so I'm not going to put any dollar signs there. It's going to say, now one good way to copy it to the end of that column is to double click on this. Another great use for a mouse. And then a way to copy it across is like so. However, since my Medicare wasn't right next to my federal income tax, I'm going to have to move this one over and copy it down again. And now I can copy over. And so let's double check. Let's pick a random row and see if that worked correctly. So yeah, our federal income tax effective rate is our tax of $35,000 divided by our gross wages. Our Medicare effective rate is our Medicare tax of $2,600 divided by our $180,000 gross wages. And our Social Security is the Social Security tax divided by the gross wages. So these are correct. Now let's look at tax rates without getting political. The more money we make, the more of it we send to the government. So a higher percentage of our income goes to taxes. Most people feel like that's right, regardless of your politics. Some people think a flat tax makes sense, and I won't disagree, but most people accept this pretty well. Medicare, it's a straight 1.45. I'll do an Alt H0 to show you that extra decimal. Most people think that that's reasonably fair as well. Here's where you start to get some pushback. Poor people pay 6.2% of their income for Social Security, and higher wage earners pay less of their income. So that's what I would call a regressive tax. Regressive, flat, progressive. So no politics intended, but this is a neat way to use a data table to see how tax rates change with income. In a future video, we'll come back to this file and do a chart, but I think my video is probably over my 15-minute limit already. Yes, it turns out it was over the 15-minute limit. I went back and edited the video and I'm already up to 20, but I realized one huge mistake I made, actually two. I would be getting phone calls and hate mail if I continued to let this violation of rule number 1 stand. So I'm going to come in here and double click this number and then click on the wage base so that I'm not using a number where a reference would work. And the reason that I've pulled these out, not just rule number 1, but the reason rule number 1 is important here is what if the government changes things? You know, what if that wage limit changes, which it does just about every year. These haven't changed in a long time. These haven't changed in a long time. This changes pretty much with the cost of living. The other thing that bothered me about this is one of the reasons I wanted to do a data table was to show you how the taxable, well, how these taxes and brackets and so forth changed with taxable income. So I meant to grab that as an intermediate output along with these other three. And so this is a good example for me to show you that you cannot just come in here and insert. Even if I did, I'd want to put it right there, I guess. So if I did a Control Shift plus, or if I right clicked and said insert and shift cells to the right, it would say you can't change part of a data table. And the short answer is you're going to have to delete all of these cells that have a table formula in them. And then you can come in here and Control Shift plus to shift those cells right. Now when you do, it's going to bring over this formatting. I don't want that formatting, so I'm going to come over here. And I'll even do something we haven't looked at yet. You know, I try to avoid the mouse, but if we use this format painter and then click right there, then that's another way. I prefer copy Alt HVST because I do it a lot and it's easy to remember that. I don't have to always go look for that paintbrush. So I wanted to get taxable income. Do an Alt HOI there. And I want that to look at this number, which I'm now going to format as an output, since that's kind of how we're doing our data tables. If it's an output up here, we make it an output over here, and then you and I are on the same page. Now I can rebuild that data table by coming over here and doing Alt AWT. No row input, but there is a column input, and it's this. And now when I talk through that, it's much easier to say that, okay, when I make $107,800 a year, I'm on row 4 in the 24% tax bracket. So I went over my 15-minute limit, but hopefully this was helpful, and we can come back someday and chart these numbers when we're working on charts. Have a great day.